Hello all. Hi, thank you for joining me on Speaking About Speaking. Apologies for the very late start there, but I got a bit thrown and forgot to click the button. But we're here now, so lovely to see you. Thank you for being here. I'm about to bring up my guest for today. This is Patrick Melville, who is an expert motivational speaker with a history in marketing. In 2017, Patrick was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, but he's currently well and looks fabulous, I have to say. He is regularly asked to speak about his experiences with mental health and resilience, and he also uses his experience to help companies and individuals with their marketing as well as their mental health. So please welcome alongside me to talk about all things speaking, Patrick Melville. Thank you for being here, Patrick. Great to see you.
Thank you very much. Lovely. Thanks for the invitation to join.
No problem. No problem. So let's start with the big question is for me, having had a cancer diagnosis when I was only 28 and knowing how that feels, I'd love to know, because I think it had a huge effect on me, obviously, but I think it's really given me the impetus to go out and talk to people and tell them that story and share that experience. Has it helped you as a speaker to sort of to get that message across to people? And how do you start those kind of conversations?
Well, firstly, thank you so much again for the opportunity. I know there's every irony that we're trying to speak, and I hope that the technology is helping. You'll tell me, won't you, Jackie?
Yeah, no, I can hear you fine. All good.
So, yeah, I mean, what we're talking about is the power of sharing. And my passion has come from being in a situation where even from the first start of my pain, I had to find ways to share. Sometimes I didn't know what the words were. And then, of course, that kicked in my weakness, my stigmas. And I think the sharing thing has really been a stronger skill, but also a passion for me. The fact that sharing is about understanding yourself and not letting your mind deciding. That's one of the key things. Our mind can tell us not to say things or can give us an answer which doesn't make sense. So just sharing is such an interesting but special tool. It's a real skill. Like at school, we learned how to do it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we are speaking in Cancer Awareness Week, I think it is, or World Cancer Day was on Saturday. And as you say, there's such a stigma still attached to a cancer diagnosis, and it's so important for people to be able to open up and share these stories, because the statistics now, I think it's 50% of the population will at some point deal with a cancer diagnosis of some kind. So were you speaking before your diagnosis, or is this something you've come to because of the diagnosis?
It's a very good question. So I'll have to be annoying and answer a bit of yes to both, because the point was actually I was giving workshops. I was taking my accreditation in marketing and giving insights to how to market smarter. And I had my own business. And when I was diagnosed, I had to stop everything. Literally, I had to stop everything. And I lost my business because I had to self-care. I had to find ways to help myself and help my family, etc. Amazingly, in a very short piece of the sort of words, I can say that 2 years later, I was given the amazing news that I was in remission. And then I found sharing was a really important way, a learning tool. It's a classic thing as a very soft tool. We're always learning. I think the moment that we think we're not learning, then we've got a bigger problem. And I've learned how to share, but it's also the style. I'm a mental health first aid England instructor. So what that means is that I train people to be a mental health first aider, like we've got physical first aiders. And there are techniques which I never learned. I mean, if I can ask you, Jackie, were you ever taught how to speak at school when you were under 18?
No, no, not formally. No, certainly not. We had debating societies was about
Yeah,
the closest we got.
exactly. All these things. I mean, I think the only thing we were taught was reading and writing, but the forms of speaking and listening are communication skills that are vital to our role in societies, in work, personal. And it's an interesting way to know, we're evolving all the time and we're learning all the time. We're building our wisdom. So it's your classic. I've only got one path in my life, going down one road. I can't look back and see what I would have learned had I not, but I do take that as a positive, which is really important if you have your own business, if you have your own trauma, to be positive. And I found positivity in sharing and speaking.
Yeah. Well, I understand that absolutely. For me, I think it took me about 8 years, really, after my diagnosis. I kind of hid myself in a kind of a little cocoon and said this didn't really happen. And I was trying to be strong for everybody else, and I'm sure you've come across that as well, where your family and friends around you are sort of kind of not wanting to address the subject, not wanting to talk about it, whatever. And it's very difficult to sort of to have those conversations, especially with the people that you love. And so you end up kind of hiding from it. And it took me a long time to feel comfortable to talk about the subject.
Well, if I can add, so there are two angles on that. You had, for example, in my case as well, like any trauma, I actually had to speak to the people who wanted to help me. I had to take it's called a frame of reference, which is mental health training. And I had to understand that it wasn't that they didn't want to talk to me, but it was because they didn't know how. Yeah. They wanted to speak, but they didn't know how. So I had to encourage them and even be specific, like, please, can you get this for me? Or please, can we talk about this? Please, can you help this person? I'm looking for ways, bring me a cake versus, can you please look after my kids? So that's one way. And the other way is also when you're actually listening to someone, it's a real skill to listen. And so sometimes you don't have to have the answer. I spoke to someone today, actually, who spoke to someone across the road who went through a mental health illness, a little trauma himself. He actually sort of has massive anxiety. And my friend came up to me and said, "Well, did I, was explaining something, thinking, do I have to say something? Did I have to say something more? And just the fact of just speaking, but very lightly, was a way to help this individual get calm, avoid a panic attack, not interfere. And speaking obviously is a two-way conversation, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you ever found that sort of people were, I think it found it difficult to know how to, exactly as you say, know how to speak to you about it. So they wouldn't speak to you about it. Or what I found as well, that other people were going through their own traumas, but somehow they thought mine was worse, or that theirs wasn't worth talking about because of what I'd been through. And actually I found that more difficult. I found it more difficult to sort of say to friends that were going through, whether it was divorce, whether it any kind of trauma that they were going through, that they were frightened to speak to me because of that. And I think what you do is amazing, because you're giving people the tools to actually be able to open up and speak about these things that are kind of stigmatized, whether it's mental health, whether it's cancer, any of those things. So how do you go into companies, and how did that start for you?
Well, like mental health and like our own passions, and experience, we all have our own paths. And the key thing is to understand where people are. Some companies say to me, "We're doing this stuff already, Patrick. Can you give a 1 hour slot about what you're doing, on a specific theme?" It could be social media addiction. It could be managing stress. It could be helping others, etc. Or it could be building a program. For example, people say, "I don't even know what the word mental health means." A good question to ask, and I will ask your listeners, is, and we don't have to go into to answers, but the main thing is mental health a positive statement a neutral statement or a negative statement? And there's only one answer, and I can come back to that. But is it positive, neutral, and negative? And some companies are like, they get a whole range of it. And of course, that is a starter point, a very sort of, a different angle to companies who necessarily have a set piece in place. So I talk to them to understand what they're doing. And it's like, of course, when you speak, you've got to speak with knowledge to get the authority, to be the honest as well. I mean, I remember the best speakers are the ones who are honest as well, who don't necessarily who guide and inspire. The best speakers, aren't they? They're not saying do this. They're just saying it's your choice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if we've got anybody out there that would like to ask a question, then please do post questions in the comments there, and we'll answer them. But I'd like to ask Patrick what speakers you are listening to. What speakers are you are on your sort of radar as good speakers?
So there's a balance, interestingly. The one I like at the moment, he's an American called Andrew Huberman, and he has his own podcast, and he's a Stanford University expert. And what I like is that he's very humble, but he has so much knowledge, and he does podcasts like you kindly are doing, and I can see definitely the traits as well that you both have in the way that he asks a question. He's very honest, but and gets, when he does interviews, people to talk and to share in the right way, like stories. We thrive on stories, don't we?
Absolutely.
And he does it in a right way to do that. So Andrew Huberman, he talks about science and actually in a knowledgeable way. So I would recommend listening to him. And he talks about tips like nutrition, exercise, all these things, but in a scientific way, which can validate, as opposed to us saying now, get up and go for a run. Now he's talked about the science, about the biology.
Yeah. That's great. So were you ever trained as a speaker? How did you start actually getting on in front of an audience?
I think behind it, I had a purpose. Sometimes when I was told to stand up, I mean, I did speak to lots of people when I was in my marketing role. I ran a team of 40 people, had to do regular meetings, but it wasn't the same as, actually I spoke to a lovely lady who I call a healer, and she's actually like a form of therapist. And she said to me, when I was talking about my life story, like I was adopted, I started talking, and then I ran sort of in an organization, an agency, got bigger, and I kept wanting to change. She said, I think the reason is that you want to talk. So I found this through my experience. And of course, one of the things about getting older is that we build this understanding of ourselves, and we learn it, and it gives us confidence. And of course, when we have a passion to talk, and sometimes becomes more motivated. I'm a lay preacher as well. And again, that's kind of using my skills, my passion, and what I say, my gift, to be able to promote and talk.
Yes.
Like yourself, I saw yourself. I mean, when you're learning, when you look back, I'm sure you find moments when you're like, oh yes, that's where.
Oh well, yes, I literally have just written a blog called "My Penny Drop Moment" because it was that. I was performing in playgrounds when I was at school and making up plays and doing all sorts of stuff. So there's definitely a performer in me that's been there since childhood. And I just wonder whether, I mean, you said you were adopted, and I know that you were adopted from Colombia.
Yeah,
and,
Bogota.
I mean, that's an incredible story because you went back to see where you were born.
Yes.
How is that? Yeah. I mean, and it all comes back to storytelling, doesn't it? So tell us a little bit about that.
And thank you. We're all part of a story. So I was adopted when I was a very young age, thankfully, and my parents have always been in touch with them and contributed with a card every year. And I always was very privileged, but also very, as when I go into places, I can play the darker skin kind of a role. But then when I talk, everyone, like your listeners, I'm sure you can tell, I don't sound very Colombian. But it's always been a lovely part of my life. And again, this is where trust and sharing come into play. and speaking about certain things. Like my mother always told me I was adopted. So thankfully I was able to mention it. And when people said to me, your father looks different, your mother looks different to you, how could that happen? And I would say my mother's tummy didn't work. Done. That trust was immediately gone, and people trusted me for my honesty. It was quite innocent, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But again, as I grow older, I really feel I've got a young family. I've got 3 kids. My daughter even says to me, Patrick, Daddy, your mother who lives near us, my grandmother, she's not your mother. I was like, well, it's a new, and that's why speaking is so important. You get different viewpoints.
Yeah.
And it's real. You've got to accept in some ways, not just keep it in here, your mind. And again, that goes back to the mental health angle. Sharing gets new perspectives, gives you time, and does take away stress.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to an American coach called Mark England for my podcast that came out this week, funnily enough. And he was talking about story hoarding, how we hoard stories from our past. And they're all kind of here, disorganized in our heads. And he, absolutely recommends you get it out of your head onto a piece of paper. And then once it's out, it's got an end. Whereas in your head, it's just kind of continues. And so there's no ending, because you just replay it and replay it and replay it. Whereas if you get it out, put it onto a piece of paper, which I've done myself, and I've found it very, very therapeutic to actually write. So yeah, that for me is a way of doing it. And that story hoarding makes sense to me.
Exactly. We've got something called cognitive diagnosis, as in disorders. And it's quite normal. There are 12. I've got enough fingers. But the idea is that it's quite normal to have it, but it's something that Mental Health First Aid England just explain. And for example, mine, and I've still got it. I have my scans every 3 months. So I have a bit of scansitis. But even sharing and speaking to the oncologist and speaking to the nurses helped me. But for example, I have a very slight disorder. And disorder is such a strong word, isn't it? But when you share it, when you speak about it, it puts it into perspective. And for example, my mind magnifies, suddenly out of nowhere, it will magnify a situation like, you're a dad. And of course, as you said just now, Jackie, if you keep it in your mind, then your mind's trying to translate it. And that's not fair, because we're built to be social. We're built to share, to support each other. There's 2 sides of our behavior. One is defensive, which is quite normal, like stress. That's normal. And the other one is called pro-social, where we're supporting each other. And that's why the very famous fact, we beat up animals that were bigger and stronger than us, which were called Neanderthals. But we could socialize together. So it's an interesting play on the need and how we're built to share stories, to talk about, like gossip. Gossip has evolved because as a way tribally to get people just to stay in our tribe or go away. That's where gossip comes from.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, we all like a story. We like a bit of drama. We like a story. We like humor, and it's all wrapped up in that storytelling side of us. Audience out there, do please ask questions if you have anything, if you're out there listening. If you're watching the replay, again, put any questions you might have in the comments, and we will certainly get back to you. Let's going back to the stories though. A question I often get when I'm working with clients is how vulnerable, how much should you share as a speaker? I mean, if I'm working with somebody and we're putting together a signature talk, a talk that is ultimately them, it's about them, it's about their journey, about their kind of story, but it's relevant to their audience, so they need to share it. How do you deal with the vulnerable side of things? Because obviously what you're sharing and when you're speaking to people and you're in rooms talking to an audience, there's some very sort of vulnerable stories that are coming from yourself, but also you're asking people to be quite vulnerable.
Yes.
So how much do you think people should share?
I think it's a good start to ask yourself that question. And of course, it's the context. When you are talking, it's a scenario that you're in. Are you talking to help others? Are you giving advice? Are you selling something? And I think it depends on the context you're trying to do. And of course, the more trustworthy you are with the subject, the more confident you can be about that. And of course, in the mental health side, there is the irony that vulnerability is something where you can promote, because it's normal to be vulnerable. That's how we're made. But it's actually prepping. And I'm sure the good speakers, it's a balance, isn't it, Jackie, between prepping but not doing too much. So, for example, if I talk and I had to give a workshop to a sort of bigger financial brand, I've actually in church, you prep, but not too much, because it needs to be more authentic, and it's a bit of acting, isn't it? But at the same time, under a controlled environment and thought. So I would say it's good to start with that question: what will drive me? What are the things that might trigger me, to react in not the way that I want to react? And of course, prepping with someone there, maybe it's a dual conversation as well. And be aware of it. I think, it's good to ask yourself that question. But vulnerable can be, writing it down as well, like a bit of that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I've got something to back up. It gives you confidence, not letting your mind just manage it all. Again, that speaking to someone before, that irony there.
Yeah. So what's the best piece of advice that you've ever been given as a speaker? Have you ever had any advice as a speaker? If it doesn't sound like it was something that you were trained for, it was just something that happened. But have you ever been given any good advice that you could pass on?
I would defer back to so one of the ones that the tips I did give just now is about prepping. When you prep, you put together just a very light agenda. The words you can come back to. For example, I play the piano. I haven't been asked to go to the Royal Albert Hall yet. If anyone wants me to, I can. I can't guarantee I'll hit every note. But it's prepping. And that's your classic thing, to be in a scenario. It's amazing. It's like speaking in some ways, that you're in a moment, your fingers are doing things, like your mouth is doing something. And it's just so natural. You're not thinking, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that. You literally, but prepping helps you get into that mode. And then, but at the same time, you want to have some space to be able to react to any questions or any comments that go from there. So versus, for example, going to see an oncologist, who you just got to try your best just to not interrupt, let them talk as well. For example, with your children, try not to tell them, or other members of the family, to be quiet.
No, listening. I mean, listening is a big part of speaking as well, isn't it? When I always sort of say to people, well, it's not about you when you're on a stage talking to your audience. It's about the audience. You're only there to impart the knowledge. And as you say, as long as most people have so much knowledge in their head that they feel they have to get it all out. They've got 20 minutes to do this talk, and they think, well, I need to fit everything in. I'll get everything in. And as you say, they don't give themselves enough space to actually improvise, have fun, relax, because they've got so much in their heads that they want to get out. It's the whole point of a talk for me, and I'm sure you find as well, because obviously you want people to ask questions, is that all you're doing is you're opening up that conversation. So you're giving some knowledge. You are, it's all there in your head. We all have that, especially when you get to our age. We all have so much knowledge in our heads that actually just giving yourself space to listen to the audience, to actually think of it as a two-way, even though the audience might not be asking you questions in that moment, you have to imagine it as a conversation. Because it's not just about you talking, it's about you sort of reading the room and listening to the audience.
Exactly. It goes back to that stories as well. And in some ways, when you're talking to someone, you're building a story, aren't you, with that relationship? I mean, that's core, is it? When you're speaking, you're building relationships with the viewers. Like, I hope we've built relationships when we met before, as well as, hopefully some of the viewers here. You're building relationships, but listening is really important. Obviously, the listeners who do the pre-recording, you won't be able to interrupt, but you get the idea. But listening is, again, like we were saying, speaking tips, speaking training I was never taught how to do it, except when I spoke Spanish. But learn Spanish. But listening is an amazing tool and an amazing stat that some research from Mental Health First Aid England, you use your listening skills 42% of your time. But generally, we've only been given under half a year learning at school how to listen.
Yeah.
So it's a really good skill to learn commercially as well as mentally, as well as speaking. You know what I mean? Those pauses. If you get those pauses right, Jackie,
Yeah.
you get some really good insight. I mean,
Yeah.
of course, there's that very infamous story about Hitler. Hitler used to pause a lot to get the crowds going, and it's a skill that can be used, and different things are other things like summarizing, asking questions, as well as it's a skill to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that what I've seen you do is brilliant. I think it's a really lifetime. I'm sure have you had a learning skill since you started?
No, you're talking there. I did a coaching course during, obviously I'm from an acting background. So the training that I have as an actor is what I've brought forward into the work that I do now. But in between time, I did a coaching course, and actually through the coaching, there is that where you just listen, you ask a question, and then you wait for the answer. And sometimes it's really, really awkward. That pause is awkward, but actually in that moment, the brain is ticking over, and the answer comes to you, but you have to put in those pauses. And it's the same when you're doing a talk, when you're stood on stage, is make sure you allow the audience enough time to take in what it is that you've asked or what it is that you've said, because it takes our brains a while to really catch up and listen.
Yes.
And if you're giving too much information, it's just overload, and so much of it will get lost. So you could kind of take out half of your content and give a handout. That's what I say. It's like, put all that stuff on a handout. You don't need to put it in there. Just make sure that you shape that talk, and you especially when you're doing something like you do, when it's stigmatized, it's people don't know how to talk about it, they're not sure. It's you need to give them time to sort of really, really think about it.
Well, I do a training course, and one of the goals I said at the beginning, which is under an accredited national company called, I think I mentioned before, Mental Health First Aid England. And you're training someone to do mental health first aid, and not just physical, but how you talk. And of course, you dive in. It's very full on, 2 days full on, understanding what is mental health and what are the sort of challenges and issues and illnesses. But afterwards, literally, I've been there in the end, and I'm exhausted, but I've done my training about it. People haven't done it, and then they're learning, and then it's exhausting. So we have to reenact, scenarios of talking to someone who's got a mental illness, and it's that patience, it's that pause. I mean, pausing is important when you're talking. I try and use that, but you got to, again, the classic speaking role is you got to fit it all in, isn't it? That's a skill.
That is a skill.
You can have, if you have loads of time, easy. I've had people saying mid meeting, got to go now, bye. It's that balance. So I think, I should have said 15 more words before, but it's not.
Do you have, though, just last question, because we're coming up on our 30 minutes, but do you have a talk that you've sort of honed, that you fit into 10 minutes, or you fit into 20 minutes, or you fit into, do you have a core of what you speak about that you can adapt for different lengths of talk?
I do. I have one which is the sort of a starter, because it's partly a bit of practice, and I know I can sort of fast forward. I'm on the old, VHR set, or jump on a CD to the, song 7. So, for example, it's about explaining what mental health is and giving definitions, and then understanding the word stress, understanding the word stigmas. So those are ways where you can put it together to create that interest as well. It's more of an education one to speak, and then sort of manage that role. I mean, obviously when I'm doing it with someone else, I need to be more flexible. So I
Yeah.
would say that is the one that comes to mind about talking. I mean, obviously, if it's about me and about what I have for breakfast, Jackie, then I think I find it very hard to bring it down to 10 minutes.
Yes, excellent. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time today, Patrick. Anybody out there, if you would like to get in contact with either of us, I have, this is, Patrick, this is, that's your LinkedIn. Is that
Exactly.
correct? So
That's my LinkedIn profile where you can get my details and hear and read some of my podcasts.
Yeah. So if anybody wanted to sort of book you for a speaking gig or a workshop or whatever, where's the best place to come and find you? On LinkedIn or here on your?
I'd say either. I'd say LinkedIn. You can see those are my details, my contact details. That's my website. If you wanted to just check what I do, and I say just to summarize, I build programs. So I've evolved from just speaking now to I do research to understand what the issues are in a different company. We discussed that earlier. Every company is different, like every person. And then I do sort of articles, and I could do lovely for like your invitation to do podcasts as well as other services. So as well as mental health first in England. So I'd love to chat, just have a chat as well. I get people talking to me about cancer as well.
Yeah. Brilliant. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time today. And for everybody out there, I look forward to seeing you next week. Next week, it's just me. You just get to listen to me speaking. So if you've got any questions, I might ask in some social media posts for questions for next week. So I look forward to seeing you then. And thank you very much for being here, Patrick.
Thank you for having me, Jackie. I appreciate it. Thank you
No,
for letting
see
me
you
speak.
soon.
Bye-bye.